Hey, I'm Bob and I like to make stuff. Today we're going to make some display shelves that you can break down and take with you. My friend Alex is a weaver. She makes beautiful hand-woven goods and sells them at craft shows. But she needed a way to display these, so she asked me to make her a set of shelves. But she wanted these shelves to be collapsible so she could break them down and put them in the back of her car. That would mean that the longest piece of these shelves needed to be shorter than 4 feet. So we worked on the design back and forth and went for an aesthetic that was kind of an antique industrial look, a combination of wood and metal. I think I came up with something pretty cool. Check it out. I needed to make 4 identical frames, and I made them out of 3/4 inch square tubing. I used the horizontal bandsaw to cut down all of these pieces, and that's a really great way to get a nice clean cut on the ends of these. I cut 8 long pieces for the vertical parts and 8 shorter pieces for the horizontal parts. Then I just laid those pieces out into a frame and made sure to square up each one of the corners before tack welding them together. It's always great to tack something like this together before doing the full welds to avoid warping from all the heat. I got those simple box frames finished. The last thing is to grind down the welds on the outside faces, but I'm also eventually going to have to clean up all the surfaces before finish, so I'm going to wait on that. The next step is going to be to make some brackets. Eventually what I'm going to want is a C-shaped channel that I can slide in a piece of wood, and then there'll be a through hole that I can drop in a pin. That'll lock the whole thing together. And to make that C, I'm going to start with the same square tubing that I used for the frame and start by drilling the holes in the top. Then I'll go back and chop it into sections. It'll make sense. Let me show you. So I used a punch to make a small start here for the drill bit to go into, and I'm going to use bolts that are 1/4 inch wide. So this is a 5/16, so the hole will be just a little bit bigger than the bolt that goes in it. There was a small burr left around the hole after drilling, so I sanded that off and then took each one of these through the bandsaw to take off one side. This turns that square tubing into a C-channel. I've got all those brackets cut, I just need to sand them down so that they're not sharp. These are going to get welded on the inside of the frame like this so that the shelves can slide in. Then the holes are going to allow for a bolt to drop through. You can put on a nut at the bottom to lock the whole thing together. So now I've got to clean these up and then weld these onto the frames. I've got the frames all welded up, so the next step is to grind down the welds that are on the outside face. I want those to be smooth, but then I also need to clean off all the surfaces so that I can blacken this metal. I'm going to use a solution to do that later on. I also need to put on these little brackets I made and weld those into place. So we're going to clean this up, weld these on next. Hey, really quickly, I wanted to let you know about a bunch of new stuff that we have in the online store. We've got these super comfortable hoodies, and we've got a whole bunch of new t-shirt designs, including, because you asked for it, Clamp Champ shirts. We've got a bunch of different color variations, and some of the other new designs are super awesome. If you want to check them out, we'll put a link right up there. I got rid of most of the weld with a grinding wheel, and then after that moved over to a flap disc to clean off all the surface and get a nice finish. If you're curious, we did a whole video on angle grinders and all the different things that you can use them for. Go check that out. I've got these brackets ready to put on now, and when I weld them into place, I need to make sure that they are perfectly parallel and that they are the same distance from the top edge so that when I put in the shelf, it slides in and doesn't bind. And to do that, I'm going to take a piece of wood and actually make a little bracket that connects the 2 metal brackets so that when I lay them in place, they are in line and I can keep them square to the outside edge. I've got all of the clips put onto this one, and so now I just need to clean up those welds a little bit, grind down a few more things, and then do this whole thing 3 more times. To finish finish off these pieces, I'm going to blacken them with this stuff. You just wipe it on and it blackens the steel and gives it a nice antique look. For the shelves, we decided on solid walnut. I took the pieces that I had and started cutting them down to rough length to make sure we had enough so that we could glue them together to make panels for the shelves. I've got these pieces cut down now to roughly the right length. They're still very rough on all the edges, and to get them to stick together and make a nice panel, we got to clean up the outside faces. Now, we made a whole bits video on how to mill lumber, and if you want to find out all the process to get these to cleanly stick together, go check that one out. I lined up those boards in the way that I wanted them to look as a shelf, and then I made some marks across the seam between the two boards. Those marks are going to show me where to cut biscuit slots. I'm going to use a biscuit joiner for this. You line up this line with the line on your piece of wood, and it cuts a little slot in the side of the piece. Once you've got those two cavities, you slide in a biscuit, a little piece of wood, in between them and put lots and lots of glue. The biscuit keeps the two pieces of wood aligned vertically while the glue sets up. Let's do it. After I got these boards out of the clamp, I cleaned up the glue line with a card scraper. This is a great way to get a really nice finish on top of the surface. I got rid of all the glue and the joint turned out really nice between these two boards. I did go back and sand the top of the board just a little bit to get it all nice and smooth all the way around. Now the next step is to make it ready to fit inside the metal frames. To do that, I'm going to set up the dado stack on my table saw and then trim off the ends so that they will fit inside the brackets I made. I got the rabbets put on the end of these pieces, and now this section fits perfectly into the brackets on the steel frame. Now the next thing is to take a thinner piece of wood and cut the same rabbets on the end of that. This is going to get stripped down into two separate pieces that are going to act as hanging rods for blankets or larger items that need to be draped over the top. So I'm going to add that rabbet and then cut those down. So now I've got three pieces cut down with the tenon on the end so they'll fit inside the brackets, and these are going to work great for hanging blankets over. The one problem is that there are still sharp edges on the top and I don't want to snag the material that's being hung over this, so I'm going to run each side of the top edge over the router table to give a small round over. Now one of the last things I need to do here is secure the shelves and the rods to the frames, and to do that I'm going to drop down a 1/4-20 bolt through both pieces, put on a nut at the bottom and lock it together. And to do that, I need to drill a hole in each of these pieces of wood. So I placed the ends of each one of these pieces down inside the brackets and marked the circle that needs to be drilled out. Now the problem is that this hole that needs to be drilled is really, really close to the end grain. Being that close to the end grain, there's a good chance that that hole could blow it out and you get some tear out right around the end. That's not going to be secure. So I did a test on a piece that's the same thickness and at the end grain. It turns out that it worked really, really well and it didn't tear out, and I think that's partly because I used a brad point bit. A brad point bit is like this. It's got a very tiny brad point right in the center, and that holds the bit exactly where you place it. It doesn't spin and it doesn't wander as it drills the hole. It turned out to be a really clean hole right there at the end grain, so I think it's going to work out. So the holes actually worked out really well. There is a little bit of play in these two pieces, but that's because the holes are slightly bigger than the bolts so that they can go in and out easily. Once you get everything locked together and there's nuts to hold these bolts in tight, everything should become a little bit more rigid. So now that I know everything fits, all the holes are drilled, it's just time to finish up these and then the whole thing will be done. I've got both of these shelving units pretty much finished now, and they can work next to each other as two separate pieces just fine. Now, the original idea for my friend was to have a single shelving unit, and so I wanted to make these flexible that they could work individually or together. So to make them work together, I measured the inside and the outside of this square tubing with some calipers, took those dimensions into Fusion 360 and modeled up a really simple connector. I printed out 4 of these pieces, one to fit into each corner, and they are modeled to fit really snugly right down into place. So now she can add these to one set of shelves and put the other set right on top. I'm really happy with how these things turned out. They're super minimal, and that's a good thing. I like the combo of the metal and the walnut together, and they do definitely show off the woven goods really nicely. Now, depending on what you wanted to display, you could add more shelves, and if you did that, it's just gonna make it more sturdy and more robust, but it would still break down into relatively small pieces. I think something like this would work great no matter what you're selling at a craft show. It's a great way to be able to display stuff and then break it down and take it with you. If you've got some other ideas for things like this, please let me know down in the comments. I've got lots of other videos that you may be interested in. Check some of those out, and don't forget to subscribe. That's it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Some beautiful handmade woven goods, weaves. She's a weaver. Weaves things. We've got these super comfortable hood. I don't know how to end.